as evidence in that statement?
Are you asking me what would I count as evidence of God, or what does the term evidence even mean?
Yeah, because like there's no such thing as definitive proof. I mean, you can believe that we exist and that we're not
Yeah,
in a
yeah, I know, but that's
simulation, but
not
we
my
can't.
question. Which one of those things do you mean?
I'm wondering. You're saying there's no evidence that God exists. So, what would you define as evidence? What would be satisfactory evidence in that scenario?
Okay, specifically for a God existing is what you mean?
Yes.
I'm not 100% sure. There are examples I could go over. Now, what I know is that God would know exactly what that evidence would be, and that God hasn't revealed any of that evidence to me. Obviously, otherwise I would be a believer. So, I could see myself. So, in terms of like evidence, there's kind of a difference between what I think would actually count as evidence versus what I think could convince me, right? Like if I went outside and looked at the night sky and the stars rearranged to say, Peterson, it's me. Why haven't you
You
called?
get out of
Love
my
God.
food. Stop that. Sorry, my cat's. Wow.
Oh, that's your cat?
Yeah, no, my cat just now jumped up on the table and stole my food.
Oh, man.
Oh, that's nice. Oh well, happens.
Well, that's what you get for eating mice, I guess. So,
No, no, I had those what's it like little wrap taco things like Tito's or something, taquitos.
right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
those little rolled up taco. He just grabbed my plate, ripped it off the table, and stole one of them.
That's not very nice. My cat's not here
Yeah.
right now, otherwise. But, anyways, so I could see that example I gave. I could see myself becoming convinced of that, but I do still believe, because I'm such an unbearable skeptic, that me having hallucinated would be a better explanation for what that was. I'll just give a quick example so you can have your turn to like talk or whatever. But when people invoke what they think is evidence of God, such as fine tuning and stuff like that, I think that those are terrible explanations. So like, this isn't exactly fine tuning, but it's close. Like the Goldilocks argument. Oh, Earth is at the exact perfect distance to allow for life to exist. Well, first of all, it isn't. But second of all, that's
It's a pretty good distance.
it's a pretty good distance. I agree. It's a
Yeah.
pretty good distance. But that's just a puddle saying that the pothole it's in is perfectly shaped for it. No, the water would have conformed to the shape of it. But like if Earth were closer to the sun than Mercury is, and we could scientifically study Mercury and be like, yeah, it's 850 degrees Celsius or 800 degrees Celsius on Mercury. But here on Earth, the average temperature is whatever it is in Celsius, 30 degrees Celsius. That would have absolutely no naturalistic explanation. And that would be a version of what they try to pass on as evidence that I could see myself becoming convinced of, because there's no natural explanation for how we could be that close to the sun and the temperatures being the way they are, assuming nothing else changes, you know?
It seems to me like the claim is more so like you're saying there's no definitive proof that to you would prove that God exists, or that there's no evidence that's strong enough that has convinced you. Another claim you made earlier is that God would know the perfect type of evidence to convince you that he existed. If God did exist, okay, so first of all, if God is, for instance, the Christian God, and he's all good, all powerful, all knowing, if he's all powerful, do you think he would have the ability to convince you that he existed?
If he's all powerful, yeah, that would be. I
So
my
in the
thick-headedness is no match for God's power.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So in the Bible, if God's all powerful and he had the ability to convince you that he existed, then the proper conclusion that you could draw from that is that that's not necessarily his goal, is to convince every living being that he exists.
Yeah, so I don't think This is especially a horrendous problem for Christianity because divine hiddenness plus hell cannot possibly equal all good.
Well, and the problem goes a little further because whenever you're making the statement that if God exists, that he would expose himself to you. The biblical God doesn't have the desire to be exposed to everybody. It clearly states in the Bible that he values faith, that he values this concept of a relationship between him and man, that basically for man to step forward and to have sort of a trustful relationship with him that would allow him to initiate a relationship of sorts. It's not an all God relationship or all man relationship. It's sort of a back and forth relationship, and
Yeah, but
that
I mean,
requires our faith in his existence.
but that's like if the government knew for a fact that 9/11 was going to happen, and then but they didn't do anything about it, and then afterwards everybody was like, "We have an illegitimate government," and the government said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hold on, everybody. You're assuming that we had the desire to tell you, but we didn't, and we don't have to have the desire to tell you in order for us to be legitimate." No, like nobody would ever extend this logic to anything else they believe in.
Are you sort of trying to relate this to the fall of man, or like the original sin, or
No,
like
I'm not. I'm
sort
not
of?
talking specifically about that. I'm talking about if hell exists and there's eternal punishment and torture, and we could even talk about problem of evil, and God just chooses not to do anything about it, then he can't be all good.
Well, I feel so. If you're taking the issue and saying, okay, well, if God's all good and all powerful and evil exists, then you also are making the preconceived notion that if God's all good and all powerful, that he wouldn't want opposition. And in order for there to be any sort of free will, there has to be opposition. Unless God's an authoritarian or a dictator, then he would give people the ability to conflict with his order. So, in order to have
But
free will, you have to have the potential for evil.
yeah, so you're not really talking about what I'm talking about, and I wasn't super specific. So, do you think that people that just
But
don't no,
sorry,
no
go
hold on.
ahead.
Do you think that people that don't know God exists go to hell?
Um, I believe that everyone's committed sin, so potentially, the Bible isn't incredibly clear. It speaks a lot about hell as different parabolistic things. So, like if you look at the Old Testament, you have like the lake of fire, um, and then it says that Satan would go to the lake of fire. Is in terms of hell, it refers to it more symbolically as a place of longing for God, and that God would be be the equivalent of water. They gave parables in which a person would be longing for water, and water would not be given to him. But it used God as in that parable as being the embodiment of water. But I'm trying to think of different. Like I haven't necessarily thought about that concept a whole lot, but I'd say probably,
You're so somebody that doesn't know God exists goes to hell. That's what you're saying, probably too.
probably. If well,
Okay, what did they
if
do
they've
wrong?
committed sin, if they've committed, I mean, we've all done wrong. We're all
Well,
doing wrong
if they're
on a daily.
born with sin, then then they can't help that like in any way. But also sinners, if they believe in God, go to heaven.
Yeah, for people who confess their sins to God and then give their lives over to God, then they are forgiven of their sins in the same way a person is bailed out of jail.
But
You don't
but
necessarily
then but
deserve
then
to.
sin has nothing to do with whether or not you go to heaven or hell. So if I don't know God exists, I go to hell. That's not fair. Well, yeah, but you commit sins, so you deserve it. Okay, but I can commit sins and go to heaven as long as I just believe in God. So the sins just don't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, I saw. I mean, I didn't come up here specifically for this topic. I know it's a topic that you brought up, but I'm just thinking off the dome kind of right now because I know that pre the new covenant, like pre Jesus dying on the cross, people used to sacrifice lambs and animals in order to receive forgiveness of sins. Um, and there were people who were pre, the Mosaic law that would have also been forgiven of sins. I don't know definitively that if a person doesn't know of God and has never heard of God, or like an infant also who has committed no sin, but I don't know definitively if a person who has never heard of God, who hasn't rejected that message, definitively goes to hell. It's kind of, I can't think of any verses off the bat that say that directly or that conflict with that directly, so I'm not 100% in knowledge of it, but I can look into that. But I'm more so, we've just kind of branched off of the message of Big Bang and no evidence in God. So,
Sure.
yeah, so I mean that's not a topic I'm a professional on. I was just giving you my off the dome expression of what I believe, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so what do you want to talk about?
Okay, so back to the Big Bang is true. There's no evidence of God. So if let me take a second to rewind. If the Big Bang is true and there's no evidence of God, God is not something. I don't have an issue with saying that the universe never had a beginning, or to say that everything has causality, to say that everything needs a beginning. But the universe specifically, if you believe the Big Bang is true, is something that requires causality. It's something that had an origin, so there had to have been something before it to cause that thing. So every action has something that has caused that action, or at least that we know of. However, the existence of a God wouldn't necessarily need that same origin principle. The Bible describes God as being pre-time, having no beginning. Whereas if you believe that the Big Bang, I think that this is something that other people, like earlier, they were calling about. What was the theory that they were talking about? With two atoms, except for I think that they were talking about.
I don't know what that guy was talking about.
I think that they're talking about baryogenesis theory, which is essentially early Big Bang. It doesn't necessarily account for the origin of the Big Bang. It accounts for matter existing after the Big Bang. That there was a essentially out of every 100 billion or every 100 billion matter particles, that there would be 100 billion antimatter particles, except for one matter particle didn't have an antimatter particle, and that's how matter came to be. Why we didn't just have pure light and energy. That's creating a reaction in which matter particles and antimatter particles couldn't cancel each other out. But yeah, so back to the my point that I was stating previously. Sorry, I got up not too long ago, so my brain's just kind of circling and circling.
You should probably get something to eat. Oh wait.
Yeah, no, I work first shift, so but yeah. With So were you understanding what I was saying about essentially the universe? If the universe was caused by a Big Bang, that's an event that has a initial um,
Yes.
cause. I
Yeah.
mean, you can go back to a certain point and say what happens before that. Whereas with God, you don't have that. So I'd consider that a type of evidence that God exists, because if you were to go back to the moments of the Big Bang
Well,
and then try and
our
rewind before that, you
incredulity.
can't.
Your incredulity about one thing doesn't increase the likelihood of another thing happening. I don't think.
Well, it does, because now you have to describe something that would come pre-universe. Because if the universe had a beginning, what was the beginning of the universe? Is it another universe where we're born out of a black hole? It describes evidence in God as not necessarily definitive proof that God exists, but that something came before the universe that was cause of the universe. Because of our universe having a beginning, which evidently it does, what came before the universe? I think that's the question that a lot of other
Well, I'm
other
not
people
sure,
that
but
I
it could
witnessed come
be.
up on.
But it could be anything. Maybe time is cyclical. Maybe quantum events that initiate inflation don't have a kind of cause and effect like we understand them today to have. There are physicists that have real working ideas for for this, and we don't know which of them are true. I don't know if there's any way to gauge which of them are even more likely to be true or whatever. But with God, it's just we don't like let's just say we have total ignorance about this one aspect of this thing. Therefore, that's evidence of God. I don't see how that's the case, because I could just say, well, how did God do it? I don't know. Well, then the magical non-exist-mo did it. Because until you can come up with an explanation for how God did it, then the best explanation is non-exist-mo doing it.
So if I see like a room with a Rubik's Cube in the middle of it, you can either say, hey, there was something intelligent that solved that Rubik's Cube, or you can just say, non-existmo did it. Oh, it just happened to fall out of nothing and land in that perfectly organized matter in the center of that room. Like, it seems like
I
the
agree that the
universe is
idea that
pretty
it just
organized.
fell there out of nothingness doesn't make any sense.
Well, you're saying non-exist mode did it as comparison to God. I believe that I'm just trying to point out evidence that God exists, not necessarily a
But
definitive proof that God exists, but something had to have come before
but
the
that's not
universe.
but
If the
that's not
universe,
evidence. If somebody was on trial for murder, and what the people trying to get them convicted did was they went around and listed all of the people that didn't commit the murder, that they have not made a case.
however,
The
if you
reason you
can
did it
prove
is
that
because
somebody was
John didn't do it, Mary didn't do it, Ezekiel didn't do it, Juan did not do it, therefore that guy did it. No.
I feel like your argument is more so that it wasn't a murder because we have no evidence that it was a murder. However, if I can prove to you that there was somebody in that house before it happened, then that would potentially lead to the explanation of a murder occurred. I'm saying that something was around
No,
before the Big Bang that would have caused the Big Bang. Like we've determined that the Big Bang happened under your worldview, that everything had a beginning. Everything was at once at some singularity or infinitely dense point. Okay, well, what initiated that then? What initiated the initial moments of the Big Bang? Because you can say, oh, well, now you could say the same thing about God. Well, God, what initiated God? Well, I don't necessarily believe that everything has to be initiated. I believe that your worldview, if you believe in the Big Bang, which you seem to have evidence that it exists, um, that's a beginning. That what came before that beginning? What was the causality of that beginning?
okay, so let me
And
try
I
to.
would describe that as evidence, not proof, but evidence. Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Right. There's several different ways I'm imagining doing this, but let's see. I think the best way would be if you're going to tell me that we're trying to compare, was this caused by thing A or thing B, you have to demonstrate that thing B exists in the first place for it to be a potential explanation. And that's not
This
being
is the
done
beginning
here.
of
We're
that.
saying thing A, I don't know something about thing A, therefore it was thing B, but we don't even know that thing B even exists. And that's the
So
problem
for
with
example,
God. So another example we could do with the body or whatever. Let's say we find a body in the forest and it's got a hole through it. And somebody says, it could have been caused by a bullet. Another person says, well, it could have been caused by an arrow. And another person says, well, it could have been caused by, you ever seen the movie No Country for Old Men?
yes.
It could have been
Yes,
caused
I
by
have.
the pneumatic calcular 5000. And then the other person says, I think it was done magically and there was no physical thing that did it. Okay, so we're all going to look at the guy proposing the magical explanation and think, I don't see any evidence of that. And then the person that says it was the magical thing goes, oh, well, was it the bullet, the arrow, or the pneumatic calcular 6000? And they all go, well, we have no idea. And let's imagine they never find out. None of that
Well, I
is
wouldn't
evidence
propose.
that it magically happened.
If you're coming into the assumption that it's pre-real, that it's non-reality, I don't think that it's non-reality. But if you're describing, what was the word you used? Not science fiction. magic, that might have been the term I'm thinking of. If you're describing magic as something that doesn't exist, I would say no, it's not something that doesn't exist. But I'd say, is it more of a stretch to say that nothing caused the universe, or that something that was even greater than the universe caused the universe? Something that was all intelligent, all powerful, or that at least existed outside of the universe would cause the universe.
Yeah,
I
but
believe that's what
we don't
God
know
is
that that
God would
exists, and it's
we
kind of
don't know that that
incoherent.
exists. We don't know that that exists. So it's
Yeah.
obvious that if something like that did exist, that it would potentially not want you to want you to know definitively that it existed. And in the Bible describes God as a being that values that trust relationship. So to say that just because you don't know definitively something that it existed, okay, well, if God's real and God exists, and that's the actual definition of God, there is nothing that you would possibly be able to do to prove definitively that he existed. What you can do is look for fingerprints to try and say, okay, well, what's some...
But I don't know what the
was
fingerprints of God look like, because I don't know how God does anything. Like, could God have put a hole in that guy's body that we found in the forest? I mean, if God is all powerful, then okay. But how did it do it? Doesn't matter. I was like, what? But then this explains nothing at all, because we don't know how it works.
It might not explain it definitively. I'd say it's
not at all.
Beginning steps of evidence.
It explains nothing, though. Like literally nothing at all.
You're saying there's no evidence of God. You're saying there's no evidence of God. I'm saying that is potential scenario in which God had intervened in our universe was to create the beginning of our universe. That something came before the universe that created our universe.
Right.
I see a naturalistic explanation of that. Aside from that, it might call it, God of the gaps or whatnot.
An argument isn't evidence, though.
It's a type of evidence.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, eyewitnesses evidence.
That's not an argument.
It's one type of evidence. It's not definitive proof. If you want, like,
I don't think it's evidence at all. A claim, an argument, I don't think those are evidence.
Yeah, eyewitness evidence is type of evidence. If you look into argumentative response, it's a course that they give you in college. But I mean, I'm trying to think of the term. Slipping my brain. I don't want to waste too much time on it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what makes you think that evolution is true? By the way, I'm curious. Not super. I mean, I do have I did take science class, but
I would say like the overwhelming amount of evidence. So without getting like specific into the nitty gritty, do you think that life is billions of years? Like, do you think our planet is billions of years old?
I think time is kind of irrelevant. Bible describes time as that to God 1,000 years is like a single day, and a single day is like 1,000 years. Also, Einstein describes time somewhat similar to that. And depending on your reference and point of view, it changes. Depending on what planet you're on, it changes. To God, living outside of our definition of space-time, it would probably change drastically. I think if you're looking at most of the time, whenever people argue that the Earth is only 6,000-7,000 years old, they reference that God created this Earth in 7 days. And that seems more so like it was given parabolistically. So I don't know definitively to answer your question.
Okay, let me ask a different question then. Do you think that humans and dinosaurs lived together?
Potentially. There are areas in which we see their bones together, which is a common thing that people deny.
No, we haven't. We haven't found any human and dinosaur bones together, or footprints either.
Within the same layers.
No, that hasn't happened.
They try to brush it off as a mud landslide occurred that would have caused them to have been mixed within the same layers, but I could try to find. I mean, it would probably take me a minute. It would waste a bunch of your time, but I could probably try to find them.
So, well, anyways, for like the simplest proof of evolution, and this was understood a long time ago. The like way back in the 1800s, by looking at the rock layers and the fossils within them, people understood that there have been periods in Earth's history, and they didn't know how far back it went, but there are periods in Earth's history where life was just completely different and types of species didn't coexist on our planet. Well, if that's the case, and animals, works for plants too, but organisms are the product of reproduction, then that means the species of today are the descendants of the different species from the past. So evolution, there we go.
So do we have? I've heard that we have specimens of dinosaur bones that had like red blood cells still contained within them. You think that would last over millions and millions of years?
Nobody ever thought that it could because it had never been seen before. But what's really awkward for the creationist is they can't make this argument. A creationist doesn't think that even the universe is 1 million years old. So they don't get to claim that certain types of tissue cannot be preserved for millions of years because that is not established. And according to them, the whole universe is so much younger than that. So they can't make that claim. I'm happy to announce that I can now offer signed copies of both of my books. This is because I've reopened my merch store where you can get your very own Spanky, t-shirt, and more. If you don't know, Rational Answers to Stupid Questions is a collection of responses to about 100 of the most common anti-scientific tropes. The book is meticulously detailed, it's been fact-checked by real scientists, and it's written in a clear and easy to understand way. Evolution, the Big Bang, creationism, flat Earth, all of that plus more is in there. Facts That Aren't True is a collection of over 150 commonly held beliefs that are not true. Each claim has a story behind it. You'll learn the history behind the claim, the science that disproves it, or partially supports it in some cases, and lots of side stories and tangents. Categories include the human body, history, religion, animals, nature, language, and a hodgepodge of miscellaneous facts that aren't true. So if you want to be equipped to handle the misinformation that you see me tackling here every day, get a copy of one or both of those books for yourself. Thank you.
Okay. Another question. Why is it if we come from if we're like cousins to other apes, why is it that we appear to be so much higher up on the food chain, that we're so much more advanced than every other species other than potentially, I mean,
language, culture, and technology.
A lot more advanced. Okay, what would have caused us, what Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle serum would have caused us to have such an evolutionary advance over all the other species? Because to me, it seems like a more convincing argument would be that we're aliens and that we come from a much more evolved planet. But like, I mean, that's just being, pseudoscience.
Well, no, I mean,
I don't see how
there are animals that are less intelligent than us, but are still pretty similar to us. And we can look at, if none of them require the alien explanation, then we don't either. So this is a very long,
similar.
What
animals are of similar intelligence to humans?
Chimpanzees.
Okay, I don't see a chimpanzee having the discussion that we're having right now, debating.
Well, you or I would not be having this discussion if it weren't for tens of billions of people that lived before us. If we took some babies and just threw them on an island and we're like, all right, well, let's see what kind of civilization they build, they wouldn't build one. They would live like wild animals.
Okay, so if you were,
if you compare a human in nature that is allowed to progress naturally to a chimpanzee, they're not going to be all that much different.
So if you were to have like you were this observer, not disembodied observer, and you came to Earth and you saw humans, and you saw the second closest thing to humans being chimpanzees, you wouldn't think, man, these guys, like, they were taking something to some sort of
we are smarter, and there's a tipping point, and there are certain features that allow us to have become as advanced as we are. but it literally only takes a microscopic difference to get to a tipping point like that.
Yeah, but there's just this massive. You're saying tipping point. You mean after a certain point you accelerate quicker because we've reached that certain point. We are accelerated so far
S-
past every other species on the planet because we don't appear to be anything like every other. I mean, there's some similarities in apes and cats and other, you know, two-eyed animals that have one nose and one mouth and two ears. And like there's some similarities, but they don't seem anything like us, dude. Like there's nothing between humans and apes that bridge that gap. That's like, they're kind of as
Yeah,
intelligent as us. Where did all of those species that would be in between go?
well, they're extinct. I mean, we know they existed, like Neanderthals. So Neanderthals were very nearly, and in fact, if we could create a Neanderthal human today, like in utero or whatever, or in vitro, and then do like a transplant or whatever, I think it would probably have a fairly low IQ, but it would be able to live just fine and assimilate culturally along with us. I think the differences between us and Neanderthals were really just fairly small, but even a small thing can cause like a kind of feedback and a tipping point that does become extreme. But I think the way our brains are wired really wasn't all that dramatically different. But because of that, there were certain, like, if you look at Neanderthal, their tool making, it didn't really evolve ever for whatever reason. So they just didn't pass on information and innovate and have a rapidly evolving culture like we do. Not to the same extent, but like if us Homo sapiens somehow never evolved, if and the only and so therefore the next most, or so we don't exist. The most advanced or whatever form of life on this planet is Neanderthals, but they're still just cave people. They would still be dramatically more successful and advanced than chimpanzees are, right? So it's the same. Even the thing that never creates the internet is still the thing you're talking about.
So also, if all of these species are related, I've heard this term of missing. It's like the missing link, I think. So
They're
like
not
within
missing.
cats,
We found them.
well, within cats, you have every type of cat is able to breed with almost every other type of cat. There might be a few genetic incompatibilities, but for the most part, like even humans have small genetic incompatibilities where one person might not be able to reproduce with another person. I'm pretty sure. I think it mostly has to do with like blood type and another thing. Um, but every other type of cat can breed with basically every other type of cat. So
Are you
what
trying to tell me
the
that like leopards and lions can mate? Or are you talking about
leopards and
domestic
lions? We got
cats?
like ligers.
Yeah, a
A
lion and a
liger is an
tiger. They're
actual
almost always
lion and
sterile because
tiger.
they have different chromosome numbers. But I don't know what you're talking
Uh,
about. Are you talking about domestic cats or cats in the wild? Because
Domestic cats can largely breed with cats in the wild as well, I believe.
I don't think
Let me let
so.
me
If there is, it's going to be a very specific species.
let me check it
I
out.
don't know the chromosome numbers of the big cats off the top of my head. Jaguars have 38 chromosomes. Lions have 38 chromosomes. Interesting.
Cats.
What? Do they all have
Can
38?
domestic cats?
This is interesting. Well, why are
Yes,
ligers
cats.
so often sterile if they have the same number of chromosomes?
Yeah, for the most part, they can all breed together.
This is interesting.
So what
So what
what
about that
divides
then?
the species of cat? Because you would think that if the universe were so, or the planet were so old, then everything bared a common ancestor. What causes it that there's not something that can breed with a cat that can breed with another type of cat that can breed with another type of cat that can eventually breed with a dog? Why is there this big gap in between cats and dogs to where they can't breed with each other?
Because they diverged from each other many, many millions of years ago. So
Yeah.
this is like asking, why can't somebody from China talk to somebody from Portugal
Yeah. So what happened
if
to
we all
that?
came from Adam and Eve? Because they've been
Yes.
separated for so long and the differences accumulate.
But then there would be a person that words between them that could, translate the message to another person that can translate the message to another person.
Well,
Why
no, but
isn't there anything in between?
in both examples, they're extinct. The proto like English is a Germanic language. The proto language between like if we're gonna make the claim that English is a comes from a has a Germanic root or whatever. Therefore, that should mean there is somebody that can understand both German and English. Their language naturally. It's like no, it doesn't work that way because the
You're
language
cutting out.
changes over time, and it doesn't hold on to when it changes. It doesn't hold on to the things that changed. Otherwise, it wouldn't change, right? So, and then for
But there
species,
are,
it's
I mean,
because
there are
they die,
languages.
like they're extinct, the in between species.
So like, the Cuban language can both speak is a mix between like French and Spanish. You have like in between
That's
languages where
Haiti,
they can
but
I have a friend from Cuba and they speak both. Or they speak a mid-tier language. I can't think of the terminology, but it's the language they speak in Cuba. They speak both French and Spanish.
Cuban Spanish.
So like there's something in between the two in which they collected both of those. Why isn't there something in between felines and canines
There
that's
is.
like
It's
this
extinct
hybrid
though,
of
or there was, and it died a very long time ago. It went extinct. Like, why isn't there a
I
language between English and German? Because the languages change.
I mean, the Bible gives another definition as to why there's not a language between English and German, but
Yes,
I don't, we
an
don't have to go
incredibly stupid story.
that far.
That tower was supposedly built like less than 100 years after the flood. There couldn't possibly be enough humans even alive.
To build a tower. I mean, there's couldn't possibly ever be enough humans alive to build a tower to heaven, but I mean, they
No,
thought that they
not
could.
less than 100 years after the flood.
Uh,
You'd have to have every single human would have to have about 100 children. They'd all have to survive, and then all 100 children would have to have 100 children. But anyways, just back to evolution.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, I mean, you've given me a explanation. I won't say it's a incredibly satisfactory explanation because you have to explain why that would be a massive gap of species that would all have to that would all have to become extinct um, between the feline gene and the canine gene to be able to erase that gap so that they can't breed with one another. And there's such, yeah. I mean, I'm just trying to
What?
picture
I
that
don't
in my
even
head how that
like
would occur.
I don't actually understand your question with respect to this.
It's I'm not necessarily pointing out just feline and just canine. There's like every species, every family, or I think they call them kingdoms. Every kingdom of animal is able to breed within its kingdom of animal, but then it can't branch out to something else. So feline, they can all breed within other feline, but they can't breed with canine. Canine can almost
Yeah,
entirely breed with all other canines, but they can't breed with feline. Why isn't there anything that would potentially bridge a gap from canine to feline or from feline to marsupial or from
because
marsupial?
if they evolved, it means that they went through changes. So those things don't exist anymore. It's like literally the perfect analogy is the language. Why isn't there somebody that can bridge the gap between German and English? Because English evolved from that proto language. The
But
proto language
but
doesn't exist anymore.
But I just gave you an example in which that has occurred. That there's people
No, you
who have
haven't.
spoken, but that the
Creoles are mixes of modern languages, not the language that bridges the gap in the history of the language. But no, Creole, that's just a hybridization. So Creoles are not the normal, natural way that a language develops.
okay. Alrighty. Well, I mean, you've answered my question. I might, think of something else, and if I'm welcome to come up in the future, come back up and if I think of something. But it was
Hell
nice talking
no.
to you.
No, I'm just kidding.